Okay, so welcome to episode 1 of our 3-part series. So taking our monthly user group and deciding that trying to do all of what we wanted to cover in a single user group wasn't going to work. So we thought, let's take a deeper dive into 3 various types of events, one being webinar, being today's session, and we'll split those over the 3 months. So thanks so much for joining us for episode 1. So just our usual housekeeping, good to know. Most of you will know we use Zoom to host and record our webinars. Replays will be available on the blog, and you can access that from our homepage or the URL that you can see right there. Please do ask questions throughout the session. We've got 2 of our team sitting there waiting to answer those. So please use the Q&A as we move through the session. There's also the ability to upvote. You can like certain questions that have been submitted and feel free to engage through the Q&A as well. If you wanted to ask a private question, because Q&A is public, everybody can see that. If you do want to ask a private question, you could direct that to myself or to one of the teams. So let me introduce you to the team. So my name is Derek Bell, the Director of Customer Success and Marketing at Marketing Cube, and I'm assisted today by Jason O'Donnell, our Account Director, and he's an Eloqua Help Center guru. So if you have a question, I'm confident he'll get back to you. Give him 5 or 10 minutes if it's a hard or a curly question, but I'm confident he can probably find the question and get that back to you through the Help Center. Matt will be joining us shortly. He's just finishing up another meeting, but he'll join us halfway through today's session. So feel free to use any of the tools, chat or Q&A to reach any members of the team. So looking at the agenda today, we wanted to take you through a few things. First big question is to integrate or not, and that's probably the key question, which will then have a roll-on effect as to what you do next. The campaign canvas will show you some specific designs of campaign canvas examples that will make the assumption that you have elected to use some of the webinar apps. So we'll show you that. Then looking at some tips for engaging webinar attendees, making replays available, and then also looking at what's new and what's coming. And then finally, Q&A. So as you know, the Q&A typically happens throughout the session and we don't hold everything till the end. But if you do have questions at the end, that's fine too. So we can hang around and answer those for you. All right, let's have a first look at some of the questions that have been submitted and also share with you a little bit of attribution information. So one of the first questions is from Mon from New Zealand. So hi, Mon, I can see you're on the line today. So thank you for joining us. I should have asked Mon to give us a little bit more information, but I think I can pretty much understand what she's trying to get to. So essentially, most of the reporting that you'd be looking at from an Eloqua point of view would be in 2 parts. One would focus very much on your assets. So which of your assets have actually performed the best in relation to conversion. So if you're sending out maybe 3 invitations over a period of time, which one of those 3 invitations actually contributed to the greatest number of registrations? Then the sales team and others within the organization are probably more interested in the people who have registered. So depending on your CRM platform of choice, if you're using Salesforce, you can look at using the Campaign Association app to do some updates there in relation to campaign member status within the CRM. So then the CRM user can go to the campaign object within the CRM and they'll be able to see whether the person has registered, did they attend, were they a no-show, etc. So that can help them with any discussions they might be having with prospects or customers from that point of view. Shared lists are another way to house relevant groups, and we actually use shared lists within Eloqua within the campaign canvas, and that's how we drive different communications to people based on who has or has not registered, and we'll explain those in a bit more detail shortly. Insight dashboards can certainly be built to provide event registration details. So versus the Eloqua dashboards, the ones that you see within the platform itself, but once you get into Insight, there are some other tailored dashboards that could be built. So if that's something you want to expand on, we can certainly happy to have that discussion and provide some direction there in relation to how to do that. So hopefully, Mon, that gives you some answers to your questions. Then Malcolm asked quite a few questions in one question. So thank you, Malcolm. I'll just check to see if Malcolm's with us today. No, Malcolm's not with us today, but I'm sure everyone will actually benefit from some of these. So let me pull this apart for you. So Malcolm comes from an organization that is a global brand, an Australian company that plays in multiple markets around the world. One of the challenges he's got is there's different Zoom webinar accounts. And this makes it a little bit challenging from the app integration point of view. Now, at this stage, unfortunately, things are just running really behind for some reason with the Zoom 2.0 app that everyone is waiting on. And the only other challenge is we don't really have any clarity around exactly what that app is going to do. So what is the second edition or second version of that app and what level of functionality does it offer? So that one, unfortunately, at this point, I can't offer more information, but I do have some alternatives that I'll show here in a moment. The second question that Malcolm asks is he encourages his users. So Malcolm serves as the administrator of the Eloqua platform within his organization. And some prefer to use the Zoom auto emails, and he wants to know pros and cons. The Eloqua registration form or Zoom, again, he encourages everyone to do it in Eloqua, and we'll cover all of this sort of as we move through today. So I'm not going to answer all of these right now, but we'll answer them as we move through today's session. How do you manage the delay when the webinar has started and people register via the Eloqua canvas? It can take 5 to 10 minutes to get them into Zoom. So that will probably depend on where you're pushing the confirmation email from. So if the confirmation email has been sent from the form, the person would receive that instantaneously. If you're pushing the person onto a campaign canvas and then delivering an email to the person based on that information, then that's going to take a little bit longer. So the preference would be to use the form, and that's exactly what we're going to show you today, is to use the form to send the confirmation email. Then, is anyone using the Eloqua events module? I played with it 2 years ago and found it a bit clunky. Your observation is pretty spot on, Malcolm. It is a bit clunky. Oracle have said quite outright that they do not plan to make any enhancements to the events module within Eloqua. And the events module, just for those on the call today, is something that is built into and available with the standard and enterprise editions of Eloqua. It's not available on the basic edition of Eloqua. Look, we have a couple of customers using it, but it's really designed for, let's say it's a 3-day conference. You're at the Hilton Hotel on George Street in Sydney. Each day you've got 5 separate streams, and in each of those streams, there are 6 sessions per day, each in varying size rooms. Some have seating capacity for 30 people. Others, it's the grand ballroom, so you've got a seating capacity for 5,000, and you need to manage wait lists and room capacities and all sorts of things. That's where the Eloqua event module really starts to sing. It is a bit clunky, but it's a big clunky beast of a thing to work on, and there's a lot of moving parts, as you would imagine, with all of those various variables that I just gave you. To answer the question, we have a few customers using it for various specific needs, but not a mountain of customers. Most customers are looking at alternative apps that really specialize on not just event registration, but event management of an entire event, and looking at integrating that with Eloqua. And that seems to be why Eloqua or Oracle is deciding not to do any investment, as per the last discussion I had with them. But of course, those things can always change. So let me show you something that I think might help with that first issue that Malcolm raised. And for those of you who are using some of these other apps, you would be aware of this and not even see it as an issue. Because of the lack of information coming from Zoom or Oracle in relation to the updated Zoom app, I would like to show you what Cisco WebEx and LogMeIn GoToWebinar have done. So this has been the case with these apps for quite some time, but what they enable you to do. So this is the App Cloud catalog. So this is the back-end settings area of Eloqua. And you can see what you're doing here is you're actually adding individual WebEx users with their specific user account. So to Malcolm's point, where he has multiple instances of Zoom being used around the world, if you imagine there were separate instances of WebEx being used around the world, individuals were able to add their credentials here in the back end of Eloqua, which then means when they're on the campaign canvas, they can select their webinars that they've created based on their user profile. So that helps resolve that problem, as far as I'm aware. Then same or very similar experience with the folks from Citrix GoToWebinar or LogMeIn, same thing. So adding credentials so that then when you're actually on the campaign canvas, So this is just looking at the GoToWebinar option. So here we are on the campaign canvas with GoToWebinar, and under the action step is the register function, which most of these apps offer. And so you can see the first thing you do is to select the appropriate GoToWebinar user account. So again, if you're a global brand with people across multiple markets using a single instance of Eloqua, but potentially multiple instances of GoToWebinar or WebEx, then you're covered because you're able to make those changes and select the appropriate details right here on the canvas. So just an FYI that things can differ and function a little bit differently if they need to. So on that point, it was interesting when you registered for the webinar today, we did ask you a couple of questions. One of the questions we asked was, which was your primary webinar platform? And you can see 56% of you said Zoom. And we've had over, I think that number, I pulled this on the weekend, so I think that number's just slightly over 100 now, registrants, but you can see Zoom certainly has the absolute lion's share of that market. And you can see why Zoom customers are screaming a bit to try and work out what's happening with the version 2.0 of the app to integrate Zoom with Eloqua more efficiently. The other question we asked was in relation to your use of Eloqua. And we take that information, you tell us how often you use it. We then adjust that information to assign you as to what we would see as a power user, a light user, a frequent user, or a non-user. And so on the call today, we have some non-users. So folks who obviously work in an organization where you have Eloqua, but are maybe not directly involved in the day-to-day use of Eloqua. But if you're here to learn about webinars at Eloqua, maybe you look after webinars. So thanks for joining us. But doing this sort of stuff up front is helpful. It's engaging. It helps people understand who else is on the call or on the webinar with them today, and can be quite interesting. So, all right, let's have a look and dive straight into this integration piece and understand what this means. Essentially, we're talking apps, and it's really the Zoom, On24, GoToWebinar, and the WebEx products that have apps available out of the box that can help you with that integration process. So I was trying to get a little bit of a feel myself out of curiosity in relation to kind of the web conferencing market and who it is and who owns the most of it. And Zoom, as we probably guessed, they're kind of right at the top. This is from an organization called Datanize, which some of you may be familiar with. They do some pretty interesting stuff. But right there at the top four in that ranking of web conferencing market share sits with Zoom, GoToWebinar, Cisco WebEx, and On24. And so funnily enough, it's these four that have apps available that will talk to Eloqua. Now, the other ones, apps can be developed, and we have a pretty amazing team who do that for customers. We have a customer, for instance, where we've built an app in place of the out-of-the-box GoToWebinar app, which was more driven based on needs of the configuration of their Salesforce platform. So the way their CRM had been developed over time meant that it couldn't really plug into the out-of-the-box GoToWebinar app. So we built something specifically for them, which is tailored to their environment and gives them that level of functionality that they're after. But there they are. So they're the top four that we would be looking at today. Then the question is to integrate or not. And so the easy answer and the default answer I would suggest to you is absolutely yes. I can't really think of why you wouldn't want to do it. I really can't think of a valid reason as to why you wouldn't. All of these apps are available and they generally work in a very similar fashion. You saw today, though, as I showed, that ability to add webinar users with both the Cisco WebEx and Citrix GoToWebinar, that's missing from Zoom. So that's one example of where they're not all very similar. That's a missing chunk from the Zoom piece. On24 functions a little bit differently, and we'll show you some different examples of that as we move through the session today. So you have two options when it comes to registering. You integrate the app and use Eloqua to deliver the entire registration process, or you not integrate and deliver a more hybrid registration process. Now, why would you do one over the other? That's probably the good question. So let's look at the first one. So what does option A look like? Essentially, the benefit, or the big benefit of this, is a more seamless brand experience, and also your ability to be a lot smarter in relation to what you know about the person. The key thing being, in the context of a webinar, have they actually registered or not? Okay, so if we're integrated, that becomes a lot easier. So Eloqua issues the invitations. You then push them to an Eloqua landing page and an Eloqua form where you capture the registration. Eloqua then pushes the confirmation email and also the following reminder emails. So reminder emails are sent to those people who have registered. And then Eloqua calls the app to confirm that there are attendees and no-shows. Now, in that whole process too, we also go off in the background and actually register them using the app with the app, the webinar provider, and we hold that information because then we need to understand who attended and who were the no-shows. We can't do that if we don't register them with the platform. So Eloqua and the app are able to take care of that for you. So key benefits of why you would integrate: it's seamless, it's a consistent brand experience, it's all about your brand. It's not about slipping in a Zoom logo here and a GoTo and a Citrix logo and all that sort of stuff. It's about your brand, and you have complete control over that experience that you're delivering to people. The other key thing that helps from an integration point of view is that Eloqua knows who has and has not registered. That's got to be one of the key aspects of this process. Shared lists can be automatically populated from the Eloqua form, and we use those shared lists extensively to drive the Canvas experience. And that's half the reason, that's partly why we know who's registered, who hasn't, who should be getting reminder emails, who requested an SMS reminder, for instance, on the day. All of that sort of stuff is built into that process. So all engagement, including form abandonment, can be captured. You really have no idea if you're pushing them off to a Zoom platform, for example, to register. Attribution is much easier once you're keeping everything consolidated within Eloqua. And also those CRM updates that I talked about earlier for the Salesforce user community. Those CRM updates for campaign members is much easier from the campaign canvas. Okay, so what does option B look like? It can be a little bit disjointed across two platforms, is probably the key problem. So Eloqua issues those invitations. The app, e.g. Zoom, will capture the registrations. The app delivers confirmation and reminder emails, and you upload attendees and no-shows to Eloqua as external activities. So it becomes a bit disjointed. So you might use Eloqua to push people to the Zoom registration page. And so that's where that experience happens. That form is pretty light on. It doesn't have anything like being able to ask dynamic questions or progressive profiling. It's a little bit more convoluted in the setup process. The app delivers the confirmation and reminder emails. And again, it's just kind of pretty standard. You can go to town with some of them from an HTML point of view, which is great, but do you have the skills or the time to do that? It's probably the question. And then from a post-webinar point of view, the attendees and no-shows is something that you need to manually bring back into Eloqua via the reports. Now, all of the platforms do have pretty good reporting, which makes that not complicated, but it's time, and you have to do it manually is part of the problem. Okay, so why option B offers less benefit? Okay, so the comms are mixed, which I said is a bit of a challenge. Using the webinar registration form means that you're not automatically going to know who has and hasn't registered. So when you think about sending out the second invitation to people who haven't registered, you don't know who that, or Eloqua won't know who that group is. Okay, unless you're doing unnatural acts with Excel spreadsheets and uploading those and downloading them first of all from your platform and uploading those into Eloqua, that just is madness essentially. There's no automated attribution. Any form abandonment is manually calculated in Excel, so that becomes a bit of an issue. And the webinar reporting is manual, especially in relation to who's registered and then obviously who attended and so on and so forth. So the option to not integrate really shouldn't be entertained, would be my general point. And hopefully that's pretty clear from what we've just looked at. Hence the animation. Okay, so let's have a look at the basics of what these apps do so that you can understand why they're so helpful. So the first step that you do is obviously create your webinar in your chosen platform. So you need to create that webinar over there. When you create the webinar, you'll receive a unique ID that represents that particular webinar. You'll then build all of your relevant assets over in Eloqua, and then you associate the ID, and that association of the ID takes place on the campaign canvas. And the app will then register those who submit the form, generally via the canvas. So the person receives the email, registers from the form, we push them onto the canvas, they go through the app, and the app then makes the call to your chosen platform and will register the person. We need to register them with the webinar platform because at the end of the webinar, we want to have clarity around who attended and who were the no-shows. So we have to register them first for that to happen. So assets that you would use would typically include the following. So a campaign canvas to send out your invitations. You'd need a registration and a confirmation page, landing pages. Also an Eloqua form, which is the registration form that would sit on the registration landing page. I would suggest to you that a second campaign canvas actually manage the reminder emails. And I'll show you this as we move here in a moment, explain why that's a suggestion. Not essential, but just a suggestion. And then of course, there'll be various emails, invitation emails, confirmation and reminder emails, and potentially also SMS as well. So they're kind of the basics. The app is on the left. What you do with Eloqua is kind of on the right. But let's actually jump in now and have a closer look at the different designs of the campaign canvas. Hello, anonymous attendee. I might have missed this. Will the slides be shared? If you've registered, yes, the slides will be shared for sure. Abby, what approach have you used for this webinar today? I noticed I registered on your website, but also needed to register on Zoom itself to enter the webinar. Absolutely. So that's a standard approach that we always take. The key thing is that by having you register when you come into Zoom, and you'll notice it's just first name, last name, and email address, so we don't make it too onerous in relation to what you add there. The reason for that is we need Zoom to know that you actually attended. And unless we put a gate up like that, as far as I'm aware, Zoom doesn't know that you attended. Simply clicking on the link is insufficient from that point of view. So that's why we take you through that process. Abby says, perfect, that's our usual approach too. Thanks for those questions, guys. All right, so let's have a look now at some specific campaign canvas designs. And look, I want to preface this by saying, as you all know, your Eloqua users, except for I think it was 7% of you today, are not actually users. Look, there could be a million ways of doing this. Okay, so I'm not telling you that what I'm about to show you is the only way to do it. I'm simply sharing with you what we found works really, really well. And hopefully maybe you can extract some key aspects from what we're doing that might help you in what you're doing as well. One of the first things we need to get down, though, is how we're going to invite people to register. Are we asking them to register, or are we asking them to RSVP? Two completely different constructs. So our example today will be simply to register. And my suggestion is to you that asking people to RSVP for a webinar is a little bit of overkill. RSVP, in my mind, is something that is more formal. It usually requires people to RSVP because there are catering issues involved. There might be dietary requirements. So you can start to see it's more of an in-person type experience. And people are really just trying to understand if people can or cannot make it. And obviously it alleviates the need to make follow-up phone calls and chase people if in fact they have responded saying yes or no. But it's a webinar. Okay, it's just a webinar. It's not, there's no catering. I wish we could send you all out a coffee card or something. Maybe we should think about that. But it's just a webinar. So I think an RSVP approach is a little bit of overkill, but we'll be talking about RSVP when we get to the August episode. So you've all registered, so hopefully we'll see you online for that next month. Okay, so what do those three different experiences look like and why are they different? So the register now process, this was me trying to come up with some sort of a graphic to explain these graphically. All right, so first one is we send out a single email that has a button in it to register now. They reach a landing page, being that second step where they fill in a form and hit submit, and they reach the confirmation page and we send them an email. Nice and simple. If they don't want to attend, they simply won't register. Simple as that. Now, if we move to an RSVP world, that becomes different. And there are two ways that you could potentially deliver the RSVP experience. First is the email with a call to action simply to RSVP, where they reach a landing page. And at that landing page, you require the person to say yes or no. Now, you've got to be careful with that form, because you don't want to ask the people too many questions that are required on the form if their answer is no. Okay, bless them for taking the time to click on no and let you know they can't make it. That's great, but let's not make it an onerous process in order for them to say no. Okay, so you can see two different outcomes there. If they say yes, they get a confirmation page and an email. If they say no, they just simply reach the confirmation page. No need to send them an email. That's probably a bit of overkill. To improve on that experience with option B, maybe what you can do is move that option of yes or no back into the email, and in fact go in one of two different directions. So if they say no, so the yes side would be essentially the same, but the no side going out the left there could potentially go through a blind form submission. So they simply say no. The next thing they see is a confirmation page saying, look, thank you, Mary, for taking the time to let us know you're unable to make it. We hope to see you at the next event. Thanks again. Regards, the team. Something like that. A much cleaner process to manage RSVP, but we will explore more of that next month. So linking all of the various pieces together. So first of all, I mentioned to you there a moment ago, the idea of potentially doing two different campaign canvases, one to issue the invitations and the second one to deliver the reminder emails. So what are we going to cover today? We're covering a campaign canvas that will send webinar invitations. So that's the campaign canvas and emails. The next one along is, we might just get Matt to mute his line if that's all right. Welcome, Matt. Registrations captured by Eloqua. So that will be Eloqua landing page and form to capture that information for you. Then the confirmation email is sent by the form. And this one can be a bit of a brain block for people. If they're a little bit newer to Eloqua, they see the campaign canvas is where, that's where emails are sent. Emails are always sent from the campaign canvas. And yes, they are. That's absolutely correct. But we can also use the form to send an email, and usually think of it more of the sort of autoresponder type of world. That's where typically you would use a form to send a confirmation email. The only caveat that you need to be aware of is you can't use signature blocks or signature rules, etc., on an email being sent from a form. Now, again, it's simply a confirmation email. Let's not overbake it. Just use the form. The other nice thing about the form is it's immediate. They hit submit, bang, it's pretty much in their inbox within seconds. If you have to push them onto the campaign canvas and you want to use the canvas to send the confirmation email, really the only reason you would do that is because you absolutely have to use a signature for whatever reason. Then that's just going to take a few more minutes. Not too many more minutes, but a few more minutes. Then the last step is the campaign canvas to send the reminder emails. And this is also where we gauge, using the app, who attended and who were the no-shows. Okay, so let's jump in and look at the invitation canvas and what that looks like. So again, just to emphasize, this is the first one. Okay, so let's jump in and have a look. I hope you've got your pen and paper out. We're going to get quite granular here, but from what I understand, this is what people want. So hopefully this helps. All right. So first example is segments. No-brainer start point to most campaigns, obviously. Keep in mind, you can have as many segments as you want. So that's always something to remember. Then the next part of the exercise is looking at the email. So this particular canvas that we've created here as an example is assuming 3 invitations. Now, at the moment, what we're pretty much doing is we're checking to see if they opened the first one, yes or no. Did they register, yes or no? And if it's a no on either of those counts, then they'll get the second and then subsequently the third invitation. Now, you may want to tailor that and not just simply ask, did they open, etc. You may want to look at clicking. And certainly with changes that Apple are making, depending on where your audience is spending most of their time, everything's going to be an open. So we need to start thinking now in relation to using clicks, not just simply opens. But again, it will depend where your audience are. If your audience are all spending a lot of the time, like in our world, all of our stats tell us that you primarily spend your time on desktop and usually in an Outlook environment. Not everybody, but statistically, that's the biggest chunk of our audience. So three different email invitations there. Notice also the naming, actually naming each of these elements, not just simply dumping the elements on the canvas, but actually titling them does make the process a little bit easier. Okay, so shared list. So the shared list becomes your source of truth and it's populated by the form. So should the person open the first email, go through, register, fill in the form, submit the form, it's the shared list that is populated, which is your registrants, your absolute source of truth, versus the form submission data. Because remember, with the form submission data, while extremely helpful, it can contain duplicates. So if a person, for whatever reason, decides to register a second time because they maybe lost the confirmation email, but found the link again, they can, they'll do it twice. So you'll get a false idea of total numbers by looking at the form. It's generally much smarter to go and have a look at the shared list that you're populating with form submissions, because a shared list is always unique. You'll never have a duplicate contact in a shared list. So good tip. So as I've said there, even though there are 5 shared lists displayed there on that page, they're all referencing the exact same shared list. So it's not 5 different shared lists, it's one shared list, just referenced 5 times from the campaign canvas. Then the next one is the weight elements. So the weight elements in this stage are essentially, and again, I name them like this because I find it just makes it a little bit easier for the user to understand the flow and exactly what's happening. So wait to send the second invitation. Did they open the first one? Yes or no? And then down, and wait to send the third, etc., so on and so forth. That very first wait step up in the top left-hand corner of the screen that's not highlighted, the reason that one's there is I find some customers like the idea of having their target audience with their thousands of people sitting there, and then their internal staff list over on the right-hand side. So when they launch the campaign, the internal folks get the email immediately, but the folks, the target audience, maybe they have to wait an hour or so. It's just that very last final check to make sure there's nothing wrong with the invitation. So they've got an hour up their sleeve should they need to deactivate the campaign and quickly make some edits or whatever the case may be. So the wait steps are important. I do make the point over there on the right-hand side that the compare date element may be something you'd need to factor in if you're looking to add people to the campaign once it's activated and gone live. Because remember, if you use language in any of these emails saying, we're 3 weeks away from the webinar, we're 2 weeks away from the webinar is next week, if you're mentioning or have any copy that says that, you need to make sure the date range that it goes out makes sense. So the compare date element can help you with that particular step. And then at the very end, instead of just having the wait steps hanging there or having no wait step at all, we label the wait steps so that the exit reports that I look at on the canvas will actually show me something that's of value. So by naming them, as you can see here, it just makes that reporting available on the canvas. The campaign exit reports, they're the operational reports that you'll see, makes life a little bit easier and makes it a bit smarter from your point of view. All right, so the registration form is the next step. Critical part, it's really the powerhouse of the campaign. As I've said there, what I've done here is just taken a screenshot actually of not today's form. Today's form is a beast because there's actually 3 webinars that you're registering for in the back end. So I thought that would just be unnecessarily complex. There's a whole bunch of hidden fields that you can see there as well. But let's just focus primarily on the fields that you might present to people. And so the standard or usual suspects, email address, first name, last name, company. In our world, we like to ask, where in the world are you? Then depending on how you respond to that, you would see the next question, which has to do with states within Australia. So if you say New Zealand, for instance, you won't see the second field. Then the next set of fields that are highlighted in that sort of aqua teal border, that's your progressive profiling block. Okay, so it makes a lot of sense to have a form, a registration form for your webinars that is in fact a template. And in that template, think about using progressive profiling so that each month I'm not having to sit here and stare at the ceiling and think about what else I can ask. In fact, it's just built in. So these are the key things that we want to understand about our audience. And so they're just simply built into the form and taken care of. SMS reminders, do people want one? Yes or no? Of course, we need their mobile number. And then would they like to have a question answered during that process? And then of course the opt-in at the very bottom. So that's the front end of the form, but it's the back end, obviously, which is where all the magic starts to happen. So what I've tried to do here is group for you so you've got an idea on what we're doing. So the first one is the basic one that everybody wants to do, which is to update the contact with form data, or in fact, create a contact if it's a brand new individual. Because you're registering for the user group, that also in our world makes you a member of the user group. And so we update a relevant field on the contact automatically based on that. We also then update our Salesforce ownership, as in sales team, I should say, sales team ownership of different contacts. So there's some logic behind those two with custom values as well. Then underneath that, there's the email group subscription. So we have a specific email group for the Eloqua user group. And by submitting this form, not only is it a global opt-in, but you're actually subscribing to the Eloqua user group. So there's some logic there to make that one happen. Now, this is the key one, hence the flashing lights to get your attention. So this one is the confirmation email, right? So this is the one that you would send out to confirm to people. It's going to have your add to calendar links in it. It'll have the join webinar link in it, etc. Any of that sort of information is right there in the confirmation email. So we use the form again to send that to people. We also use some notification emails as well. So the notification emails go to various people within our team. So remember, notification emails are a internal construct. So think about it, it actually is an Oracle Eloqua branded email. So you have no control over what it looks like. It's just simply going to specific people to tell them that an individual has registered. And so you can control that process. Then we've got all the shared lists in place. So the first one is webinar registrant, and that relates to this month. So that's this month only. We then have anyone that says yes to an SMS, we have a user condition to drop them into the SMS element or a shared list. Then we also have a shared list that this shared list is, it's probably nearly 5 or 6 years old. And it's just simply a list of all time user group registrants. So if at one point 3 years ago, you registered for the user group using the same email addresses today, and today's the first time we've seen you in 3 years, that's fine. As far as we're concerned, you'll go into that shared list, but you're already in there. So again, there's no duplicates. So it's just a definitive source that we have of people who have at least registered once for the user group. And then anybody that asks a question, we also drop them into a shared list as well, because sometimes we will alter the invitation emails to say, hey, it looks like you've never asked a question. So how do we know that? We know that because you're not in that shared list. So we can play around with that to deliver that experience to people. Then add to campaign. So again, I just want to really highlight this one, hence the flashing lights. This is where we move people from here, the form, onto the second canvas, which is going to now deliver the reminder to attend emails. Okay, so why must I have add to campaign? And you need to do this even if you're going to do everything on a single canvas, by the way, not just on both. So if you send an email to an individual and they then share that with a colleague of theirs, but that colleague is not a campaign member, if that person clicks through and submits the form, they'll receive their confirmation email, but simply submitting the form doesn't make them a campaign member. So while their colleague will go ahead and receive the reminder emails to attend, that particular individual who had been shared the invitation email, they're not a campaign member, and so they'll never receive the reminder emails unless you add them to the campaign. So for people who are already campaign members, not a problem. We're just going to, Eloqua is just going to move them down to a relevant place on the canvas. However, for people who you didn't have as a campaign member, This will rectify the scenario. Now, that problem usually plays out because the salesperson will come to you and say, what's going on? My contact, James Smith, registered, but he never got the reminder emails. You guys, blah, 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 the usual routine, right? So that's what's happened in that scenario. So we need to make sure that we add anybody that submits the form back to the campaign canvas, whichever one you choose to do, a single canvas or the canvas that actually sends the reminder emails. The next one is add to program, and this is optional, but essentially this is how you get anybody from a form submission into your CRM, would be via a program. So if you wanted everybody who submits the form to go through and be either updated if they're a contact or if they're net new and create them as a lead, then a program is how you achieve that. And then of course, the last two for us is a confirmation page. However, if some people fail to opt in on the form, they're actually taken to a page that says, hey, you failed to opt in. Sorry, we can't help you until you opt in. So go back, try again, tick the box, etc. You may choose to do that differently, but that's how we roll at Marketing Cube. All right, so how's your brain doing at this point? We've still got one more canvas to do. Okay, so this is the next one. So this one focuses primarily on communicating with the webinar app. So in this example on screen, you can see I've got first of all, they come in from a form, they go through the Zoom webinar register process. That's where we put in the webinar ID. The Zoom app communicates with Zoom, registers that person with Zoom so that again, later on, we know who attended. But we're coming in from various wait steps, like so. Then the Zoom webinar piece, as I said. So it doesn't matter if you've got, whether you've got GoToWebinar, whether you've got On24, what you've got, it doesn't matter. They all pretty much function exactly the same way, like this. So we use the canvas and the associated app to register them with the app so that the webinar platform knows who they are when they arrive. Then again, our shared list. So this is the same shared list that we referenced on the first canvas. So not a new one, it's the same one. It's your source of truth for who actually registered. Then the reminder emails. So in this case, we have 2 reminder emails. Now, both reminder emails are sent just to registrants. Now, if they asked for an SMS, we would suggest that people will be sent the SMS as well as the final reminder. So the logic or the reasoning behind that is that, and this is very much our world, it may not be your world, but I would suggest the vast majority of you today are sitting watching us on a laptop or potentially on external monitor, depending on where you are in the world. But essentially what we want to do here with the SMS reminder construct is first of all confirm they're a registrant. We then reference the shared list that we populated from the form, that is everybody that asked for an SMS reminder. It's always a good idea, and this is just a good safety check. Just make sure, do we have a mobile phone number populated in the mobile phone number field on the contact? That's the first thing. Now, if it's not formatted correctly, not much we can do about that, but we at least want to make sure there is a number in there that we can attempt to communicate with, and then obviously send the SMS. So my logic around why I send both, and this is the experience that most of you will have with us if you ask for an SMS, is that it's one thing for you to get the SMS reminder, but then you have to go to your email and do a hunt and find the email with the join meeting link. So depending on how organized we all are, you either have it already sitting in your calendar because we gave you the add to calendar link. That's in an ideal world, but hey, look, we're all busy, right? So what I'm trying to do is just remove any barriers for you joining us. So in the SMS, we typically say, we've just resent you the email with the join to webinar. So by the time they look at the SMS and go to their inbox, then they'll see that email sitting there. They can click on the join to meeting and they're done. For the small number of people that would watch on a mobile device, you could include the join meeting URL and details in that as well, in the SMS as a URL, if you wanted to do. But that's more about understanding your audience and their behavior and potentially how they interact. And then the next part is we now need to wait, using a wait step till at least an hour after the webinar is a good period of time to wait. Got to give the app some time to process the data and information. And now we make a call. And so again, it doesn't matter if it's Zoom, if it's On24, GoTo, or Cisco WebEx, they all have the same level of functionality. And then from here, we can do some automatic things. We can drop people into a no-show shared list or an attended shared list, automatically create the external activities that suit those various behaviors. And then depending on how organized you are, you may go off to a third campaign canvas where you want to manage the sort of post-event communications. So that could be access to replays and those sorts of things. All right. So hopefully that gave you some examples of how you can play with the canvas to deliver those various experiences. So let's look at engaging your webinar attendees during the webinar. So hopefully that's something I've been able to do for you today. So these are largely just observations of mine that I've had over the several years that we've been running these webinars, and other things that I've done in the past. Some things that you might want to think about. Certainly using video is a good one. We tend to find actually showing you the application like we've done today tends to be more of a favorite than watching a pre-recorded video. But it all depends on your audience and what it is you're trying to share with them, right? We like to be able to capture information during the registration process. You saw at the beginning, we're able to give you a little bit of a profile as to a bit of an idea of who's on the call today, which platforms they're using, those sorts of things. QR codes is something that we've been playing with a little bit more recently. We've certainly become very familiar with the use of QR codes more generally. And I think it's fair to say that the poor old QR code is having a renaissance within the world. And certainly marketers can take advantage of people's skill and ease of use of QR codes these days. Hopefully there's some tips there that you find helpful. It does take a team to make a great webinar though, and this will vary from platform to platform. But there's the person presenting. In the On24 world, they call that the presenter. Other platforms refer to it as a host. The On24 platform has what they call a producer. And so you actually have to have these two people. It's very difficult to run On24 by yourself, I think. I hope they don't scour me for that one, but yeah. So typically it's your presenter and your producer, but it's a pretty phenomenal platform. It's a bigger machine than sort of any of the other three that we've talked about today. It's always good to have somebody manage Q&A. We learned this with a client in New Zealand who ran a fairly large webinar over several days with different sessions, and they discovered very quickly that they absolutely needed to bring staff in to assist and manage Q&A so they could respond in a more timely fashion to people. So it could be one person, or maybe it's multiple people that you have helping manage Q&A, and it could be chat as well. So again, it could be one person or multiples, but it's always good to frame and encourage people to use Q&A for specific purposes versus chat potentially for other purposes. Chat typically is more one-on-one, but each platform is a little bit different in the way that you can configure it. And then, of course, your panelists. So you may have a single panelist, or you may have multiple panelists participating as well. So don't forget all of these sort of people and the various roles that they can play in that process. Now, if you've got your mobile phone handy, can I encourage you to grab that mobile phone and open it to your camera and scan this particular code. So the good people at On24, they've got some tremendous resources to really help you think about your webinars and the format of your webinar and what you're doing on those webinars. Now, there are a few clients on the call today who I know are using On24, and you're probably like, yeah, ho-hum, we've seen those, they are great, but that's okay. Anyway, it doesn't matter which platform you're using. I probably shouldn't say that, but it doesn't really matter which platform you're using. There's some really good tips in here, and they do run some really great webinars themselves around hosting webinars. So have a look at that. Hopefully that's helpful. So go ahead and scan that, and I think you will find it helpful. All right, we're almost done. So maximizing your replay library. Definitely. So the replays become a really valuable tool. And we've certainly found, we started the user group as a tool for our customers. We then were running that, and that was in person. We used to book out a room at a hotel and have folks come in, and we had a great time. Fruit platters, the works. then we decided to do the webinar. And so we did both. We did both the...
So something we've done at Marketing Cube is, and you may have actually accessed some of this content, is we've put our user groups onto an Eloqua landing page and created almost like an Eloqua microsite with all of these replays. So we put them behind a form. So once you click through on a particular user group replay, it goes to the actual individual page with the form, and then that's where we capture the information and the data on new leads, or we capture the information or engagement from an existing contact. And then obviously the reporting aspect of that is really useful to us. So we've got the point there to think about reporting to help keep you up to date with replays access, and think about trigger-based campaigns to engage viewers.
Beautiful. Thank you, Matt. Sorry about that, guys. It was a package. COVID. Gotta love COVID. Why is life so difficult? The key thing I want to share with you there is if you have a look, if you've got your phone again, if you scan this one, this will take you to a replay library where we host some, not all, but some of the Eloqua user group replays. So it's something that we swap out and change and mix up a little bit, and we use it in different campaigns to drive people to. But typically it's from email campaigns, not from our website, but typically from various email campaigns. So it's one way to think about working with those replays. You can, On24 has a pretty cool environment that enables you to host those, and you can sort of brand that up, etc. So it definitely looks like yours, which is really good, but certainly something to consider. Okay, very quickly, there was just a webinar at 1 a.m. this morning, our time here in Sydney, that looked at 21C, which is the August release of Eloqua. All I have at the moment is just these highlights and the dates as to when that release will take place. So as soon as we get more information, we will try and get some of that to you, but certainly by next month, we'll be able to give you a better idea as to what's happening. But by then you'll already be on. So if you do subscribe to our important updates, we'll get this information out over the next week or so, once we get a little bit more information from Eloqua as to what we can expect. The key thing are the dates, and the dates relate to which pod you're on. So when you log into Eloqua and you actually look at the URL, you'll see your URL is secure.p012346 or 7. And that relates to your pod number. So if your URL is P01, you're on pod 1. So then when I show you this deck, you'll be able to identify when it's happening for you. So at Marketing Cube, we're on pod 1. And so I've translated this from Eastern Daylight USA time to Australian Eastern Standard Time. So you can see it's happening on Saturday the 14th, which I think is better than happening on Friday the 13th. You kind of wonder if that's a bit of a challenge, don't you? All right, so yeah, for us at least, it's happening on Saturday the 14th during the day, so outside of work hours primarily. I find generally it doesn't impact a great deal, but it always is something to be aware of as to when they're happening. So many of the Australia, New Zealand clients will be sitting on pod 7, which is actually the server based here in Sydney, Australia. Pod 1 is actually in Toronto in Canada. So that's happening about midnight. So again, it's happening sort of after hours, which is still nice. So from midnight till 9 a.m. on Saturday, the 28th. So a little bit later in the month, but all happening in August. And from what we can see so far, the browser editions remain exactly the same. So Firefox 87 and Chrome 89. So no changes so far that we can see there. Alrighty, so thank you so much for joining us today. I will just quickly go back there for Q&A. If you do have any questions, please feel free to hang around and ask those questions. More than happy to answer any of those. Just use the Q&A to present those right now. And if not, we will see you next month. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
And hey, Derek, I just wanted to make one comment. Today's session was very thorough. It might seem overwhelming to some people who maybe haven't started with this. So, I'd be remiss not to say if maybe this seems overwhelming or overly complex, we are more than happy to work with you. You can contact myself, Derek, or the support team. We can even build these event templates with your help. So that way you're really only doing it one time and just changing out content and whatnot. So we're always happy to help with that.
No problems. All right, guys, and we'll see you next month for the next webinar, which you've already registered for and is already sitting in your diaries. So thanks for that, and we'll see you next month.